Hello, it's Cried here, bringing you a tier list for sorcery spells in PvP. The PvE tier list will come next in a different video. Since this is a PvP tier list, it will be centered around level 125 to 150, where the PvP meta is located. The list will also be skewed more towards duels rather than invasions, even though I will give invasions some weight. As you can see from the relative size of the tiers, there are far fewer spells in the higher tiers than there are in the lower tiers. Let's start out with something simple. Both Thops Barrier and Carrion Retaliation are defensive spells that have a similar Ash of War counterpart. The Ash of War versions come out way quicker and is simply much more superior. These spells are also not very friendly on the scroll wheel when it's something you want to immediately cast on reaction. They're just trash spells I don't suggest running even in PvE, so they're easily F-tiered. Next, the Magma Sorceries are all pretty lackluster with their slow cast speed and awkward faith requirements. Yes, the faith requirements aren't high, but if we consider the Astrologer or the Prisoner class, the two most likely candidates for optimizing a spell build, you will need up to 12 extra points in faith for the lava spells. The lava staff also happens to be one of the worst scaling staffs for endgame, while the Prince of Death staff is backloaded. So at meta levels, neither of them really beats the Carrion Regal at equal levels of investment, even if we include the bonus. It also only grants 15% boost if you're just using it on the offhand as a passive stick. The saving grace for these spells is their large area coverage and control, allowing them to float at D tier. The only lava sorcery that is not in D tier is Rykard's Rancor because of its annoying tracking. You will find that delayed hits for spells tend to be decent because you can set up for combos or delay actions. This is especially important now after 1.05 without regular chain casting. Setting up time delay traps is a large part of keeping your enemies on their toes. Next comes the Gravity Sorceries, of which only 3, Rocksling, Meteorite, and Meteorite of Astel deals physical damage. It probably isn't a surprise Meteorite and Meteorite of Astel are F tier. They don't work well with a slow cast time, especially against small targets who can just roll. Gravity Well doesn't deal good damage, nor good damage to FP ratio, even if we consider dual wielding staffs, with the Regal staff in the main hand and the Meteorite staff in the offhand for a whooping 30% bonus. The only gimmick that it helps with is dragging enemies in. However, Collapsing Star also does the same thing, except much better because it is easier to catch your enemy with Collapsing Stars, as the projectiles don't all arrive at the same time. It also comes with higher poise damage than Gravity Well and can be charged for a delayed timing. Finally, while Rocksling is a great tool in PvE, you will find it difficult to hit with Rocksling unless your opponent has no idea what they're doing. Its specialty of being a reliable source of physical damage for PvE doesn't help it much in PvP, as the projectiles are incredibly slow and have poor tracking. It doesn't fire off that quickly either, and if this is for invasions, rocks can easily get destroyed on the wall in narrower places. Next, let us discuss Frost Sorceries alongside some other types of sorceries, starting with Moon Sorcery. Yeah, I know Renalas doesn't do frost damage nor apply the frost status effect, but I'm grouping it with Ronnie's Dark Moon as Moon Sorceries. And it is precisely because Ronnie's applies 270 Frostbite with Phantom status effect being a thing, that it is ranked higher than the Renalas. These two spells are slow to cast, but if you manage to land either of them, they're quite powerful. The other thing is, even if you miss, due to Phantom status effect, you can also apply the Moon debuff, which decreases your opponent's magic damage negation by 10% in PvP for 60 seconds. And since most sources of sorcery is magic damage, this helps quite a bit. And as for why they're D and C ranked, it's because, yeah, they're high risk, high cost, and also high reward, but the chances of landing them on someone competent is quite low. You can also get punished during the casting phase unless you happen to be far enough. If not for the fact that these spells track over an incredible distance and also applies the debuff, they would certainly be ranked lower. Next is another pairing of Frost and non-Frost. The Frozen Armament only adds 48 Frost buildup, and you can't even use this on most weapons that already have a secondary damage type or status effect. Frost Infusion is better on any weapon if you want the Frost status effect. Furthermore, because of the low buildup, you pretty much rather just take Scholar's Armament, which is also narrow in its choices of usable weapons, pretty much Clayman's Harpoon. And even on the Claymans, more AR doesn't necessarily translate to a stronger Ash of War, because there are 3 different major types of Ash of War scaling, and the base infusion matters quite a bit for 2 of the 3 types. Therefore, even on a Clayman build, you might opt to not use the Scholar's Armament, because you would want something like the Magic Infusion instead. So yeah, this earns a D tier. On the other hand, the Scholar's Shield is actually quite decent if you run a shield. It increases the magic damage negation of your shield by 70%, and other damage negation types by 30%. It also increases your guard boost by 20%. This is a decent spell, but oftentimes if you're going for a Great Shield Poke build, the Great Shield Poke itself is already OP. This does make things even stronger, but you're also stuck with a shield skill unless you have no skill attached to your shield. Your opponent is also going to less likely make stupid trades and just wait for you to give an opening. Honestly, a good spell, but if you're turtling in PvP, just the shield enough is already plenty OP. Let us follow the discussion up with some other utility and buff type spells. The invisible sorceries are most applicable in invasion shenanigans. Starlight, makes your surrounding bright. Does nothing much for PvP, especially when 1800 runes can get the job done too. As for Lucidity, you probably forgot this thing even existed, but it does a very narrow job, and you can use boluses instead. Terra Magica though, boosts your magic damage by 35% while you're standing in the area, giving you a very strong area control. It makes approaching you difficult because Slicer can deal absurd amounts of damage for 4 FP. And all your other magic spells are also boosted. Not to mention, it also works on weapon arts and weapons that do magic damage, like Moonveil. Because it allows you a more powerful trade and area control to the point where you can force your enemy to retreat or play carefully around it, this is rated A tier. The Mist spells also provides area control, but these don't last very long, while requiring your opponent to stay within them for a significant amount of time for a decent effect. Starting with Fia's Mist, there isn't a whole lot of ways to apply Deathblight, and none of the ways available are very powerful or consistent, which is honestly better than the alternative where Deathblight is OP, and people just run around without any damage by killing you with Deathblight. Night Maiden's Mist can burn quite a bit of your opponent's HP and goes through shield too, but it does require your enemies to stay within them. Sure, it can work on some less skilled players, but you're unlikely to meet good players who blindly charge into the mist. Furthermore, it also damages the caster if the caster touches it. I prefer the Chilling Mist over the other mists because it is much easier to supplement the cold status buildup with another source of cold application. Cold itself is also a great status effect in PvP. Furthermore, you can also stay within the mist if needed. This only lasts for 15 seconds, but you can free aim the skill to make it apply to quite a large area. If you want to see some Chilling Mist in action, I have my Night Wielder PvP build linked in the description down below. Okay, the last few frost spells. Zammer's Ice Storm's slow cast speed makes this spell very weak because its area of effect is right around the caster. You will have to stand still and cast this spell, while praying your opponent doesn't just do more damage than you can do with this spell. That is also assuming you have enough poise to tank through their attacks, because this spell doesn't provide any hyper armor at all. Ice Crag is slow traveling and very short in distance when compared to other projectile spells. It also doesn't come with the strong tracking of spells like Star Shower. And finally, Adula's Moonblade, which is both a frost spell and sword spell, the next category we will cover. After the motion value or damage percent nerf on this spell, it is still decent, especially because of the large area it covers and the frostbite it still applies, but much weaker than before. Its startup isn't quick, so if you want to run this spell, I suggest running at least either Radagon Icon or the Azur's Glintstone Staff, if not both, to make it more difficult for your opponent to evade this spell or punish you during your cast time. The other sword sorceries are Carrion Slicer, Carrion Piercer, and Carrion Greatsword. Carrion Greatsword acts like Adula's Moonblade without the extra sword wave. It covers a huge area and has very good damage to FP ratio. This thing actually hits harder than the Adulas at melee range, but I would say it leans more toward the invasion side of Elden Ring because of its shorter range, while sharing the startup of Adulas. It is often overshadowed by the Adulas because of their similarities, but in terms of power, I think this is still very much a C tier. Carrion Slicer should be pretty self-explanatory. A spell with good damage while having the highest damage to FP ratio, whilst still being incredibly quick on its crouching and running casts. Because of the existence of backloaded staffs, this thing can hit like a truck at higher int levels, like 80 int, versus say, simply holding a magic straight sword. This is undoubtedly the best spell for mages to use as a melee deterrence. Thank the Elden Lords you can't dual-wield Carrion Slicers. Carrion Piercer is an A tier for its ability to roll catch, especially because you can charge it to delay its timing as well. This thing hits quite hard and has a decent damage to FP ratio. Its uncharged version also deals 101.75 poise damage too, which is enough to stagger most opponents. If we're talking about the swords, we might as well discuss Glintblade Sorceries, which is not to be confused with Sword Sorceries. Carrion Retaliation is also considered a Glintblade Sorcery, but as I said, don't use it. 3 of the other 4 Glintblade Sorceries serve nearly identical purposes, summoning flying sentry blades floating above or beside you. Using a Carrion Regal Staff at 80 intelligence with my sorcery spreadsheet, we can see the damage each individual blade deals before damage negation. Carrion Phalanx, the spell that summons 9 blades, is overall stronger than a Glintblade Phalanx that only summons 5 blades. Great Blade Phalanx will tend to do a bit less damage than the Carrion Phalanx for more FP and stamina cost. However, it does deal more poise damage. I do find the Carrion Phalanx slightly superior though, because these swords will very often be dodged, and you want to spam them as a form of deterrence rather than a steady stream of damage. With these blades up, you know your opponent has to dodge them once when you're close, allowing you the offensive upper hand. Magic Glintblade, on the other hand, is a delayed attack by time rather than distance. This one is also a very good setup tool that forces your opponent to dodge or strafe, even from afar. This can buy you time for your flask or to set up combos. With chain casting not being a thing, the main way of mixing up with sorcery are time-delayed attacks that allow you to mess up your opponent's timing. Death spells. Tibia's Summon is also a delayed spell, but the crappiest one of them all, where the skeletons attack the location of your opponent at the instance where they were spawned without the slightest tracking. Combine that with its extremely slow cast speed makes it a crap spell. The best way to land this spell? Click cast and then pray your opponent doesn't know how to move or is AFKing. Explosive Ghost Flame? Extremely cool, but long cast and long recovery. Maybe an element of surprise versus less experienced players, but you're just asking to be punished for casting this spell in PvP, and your opponent has 2 windows to do this. Once before you cast, and once after if they didn't already punish you the first time around. Rancor Call is essentially a slightly more FP efficient Ancient Death Rancor, with 6 skulls instead of the Ancient Death's 9 skulls. Ancient Death Rancor definitely has the overall damage advantage, but Rancor Call can still force your opponents to dodge. The other big advantage Rancor Call has over the Ancient Death is much lower faith requirement. This means it is much more easily incorporated into builds that don't build both int and faith by paying a lower faith cost in order to have an annoying spell that chases your enemies down. I place Rancor Call at C tier while the Ancient Death scores a B tier. Rock Blaster is basically the superior version of Shatter Earth, but still, these spells are difficult to land, and mostly for invasions and not duels. It doesn't mean you can't do decent damage with Rock Blaster if you can somehow catch your enemy, but it just isn't quick nor practical. Shatter Earth has 200 innate poise for hyper armor, and Rock Blaster has multiple hyper armor bonuses at different times of the cast. It has 150 on startup, and 100 while it is held, and 200 on the finishing attack. Briar spells are a mess right now. The only thing that used to save Briars of Sin was chain casting. Now, without it, it is just as bad as Briars of Punishment, especially with their faith requirements. Maybe a DLC can make Thorn Sorceries better, but right now they're just a meme. Oracle Bubbles is crap with its slow cast and weak bubbles, but Great Oracle Bubble can be used as an area control tool. It moves faster than you think, and if you charge it up, at the end of its path, you can think of it as a mist-type spell that explodes and deals high damage to your enemies if they come in too close. A great tool to surprise your enemies with, especially in invasions. Gavel of Haima was decently popular as a chain cast option after they added 200 hyper armor to it. Now, both Haima's spells are more invasion oriented, as their slow cast speed makes them difficult to consistently pull off in duels, while producing a positive outcome. For Cannon of Haima, I suggest trying to free aim it if you're trying to use it in duels. Loretta's Great Bow's main purpose is for sniping targets from afar, but even then, you're likely to miss if the enemy moves. This is certainly more geared towards invasions too. Loretta's Mastery has much better tracking. It is also harder to fully dodge because of the spaced out timing. You do need a more open space for this spell as it shoots the arrows across a very wide range. Neither of these spells are very FP efficient. While Loretta's Mastery doesn't resemble Stars of Ruins nor Star Shower, they're actually spells that perform roughly the same function, except it goes further. Once again, even Loretta's Mastery is more invasion oriented because its specialty lies in its range. Next comes the Crystal spells and their non-staff buffed counterparts. Crystal Burst and Crystal Barrage are not buffed by the Crystal Staff, even though they have Crystal in their names. These spells work a lot better against larger enemies in PvE, as you can land more crystal hits. In PvP, you can use their shotgunning type properties to catch your enemies in a bit of damage. But the individual MV or damage percent of the attacks are quite low. And because our player models are way smaller than most monsters we fight, the crystal spells aren't that effective in PvP. The last crystal spell without a regular counterpart is Crystal Release. Like the Zammer, this uses yourself as the center. It costs quite a bit of FP and deals crap damage. I suggest avoiding this spell even in invasions, because you can find better sources of area control where you don't have to sacrifice yourself. The Downpour spells create an area that damages your opponents after a short delay. Founding Rain of Stars has quite a wide area control, and does an okay amount of damage, even though it is quite simple for your opponent to simply avoid the area. Magic Downpour has quite the low damage, but it does have a neat gimmick. You can reflect your own projectile with spell parries. If you point downwards without targeting an enemy, you can get the spawn of this spell to come out quite low and be more consistent with Retaliation. This isn't an optimal setup on the screen, by the way, which is why Golden Retaliation is doing such low damage. I'm just demonstrating the effect. Stars of Ruin and Star Shower are both S-tiered because of their annoyingly powerful tracking. While both spells are very inefficient damage to FP wise, their incredible tracking and spaced out timing makes them very difficult to fully dodge. So why is Star Shower also an S tier? Star Shower essentially does the same thing as Stars of Ruin, forcing your opponent to dodge. While it only has 6 shots instead of 12 per cast, it has a higher MV per shot. Stars of Ruin's damage suffers greatly from its attacks being split into even more number of attacks at a lower MV per attack. Therefore, in terms of real damage, Star Shower's per hit damage is higher. Essentially, Stars of Ruin lasts longer, but your opponents would most likely still be spending that longer duration dodging. So both Stars of Ruin and Star Shower will force the enemy to play defensively. As for Glintstone Stars, 3 is not enough and very easily dodgeable. Combine that with the star spell's poor damage to FP ratio, easily a F tiered because you would always pick Star Shower or Stars of Ruin over Glintstone Stars. Shard Spiral lost its chain cast, so it is now much harder to set up. You either have to chain it from a jump cast, or cast it with its lengthy cast time. Furthermore, while it does force your enemy to strafe properly or dodge once, you can easily achieve the same effect with other spells. This one is quite the knowledge check, but it does have the potential for combo setup. The Glintstone Arc is really just a wider Glintstone Pebble. You can strafe it as well, but you can still easily roll it because it's not fast like the Swift Glintstone Shard. Comet Azure might be a boss slayer in PvE, but the cast time for this spell should explain its F tier rating without further elaboration. And finally, the Projectile Sorceries. Swift Glintstone Shard is one of the best universal tool for sorcerers. This spell is quick and allows you to outrange all other melee options. With its low FP cost, this spell is your best tool at kiting and is a rare spell that can be used while jumping, making it great to kite with or chain cast after a jump. For the other 4 projectile spells, you can think of them like this. The same colored ones are a pair because of their startup animation time. The pink pair is the Great Glintstone Shard and the Glintstone Pebble. Both are outclassed by the Swift Glintstone Shard, but if you're going to run either of them, the Great Glintstone Shard is better because of its slightly longer range and higher damage per hit. Yes, it is less FP efficient than the Pebble, but if you're running them, it is to deal damage rather than trying to be FP efficient with a minor spell like this. Which also puts the Comet and Glintstone Comet at a higher tier, because you can still chain cast them out of jump cast. Here the Comet ranks higher too, because if you're going to want one instance of burst damage, you would pick the one that deals more damage in one hit, since you can't freely cast these spells, so you won't really be spamming them. The Night Sorceries share a lot of common features with the regular versions, but they are very powerful with the Staff of Loss. In fact, if you watch the analysis for Night Wielder and Wintry Knight on my channel, and the accompanying fights, you will discover some secrets with these spells. First up, the Night Sorceries not only do more damage than their regular counterparts with the right setup, they are also more FP efficient. And on top of that, the biggest advantage they have over the regular sorceries in PvP is that they are not counterable by spell parries like Carrion Retaliation, Thops, Golden Retaliation, nor even Eternal Darkness. However, they do require you to at least offhand the Staff of Loss, if not dual wield Staff of Losses. This means that your spell selections are much more limited, or your other spells would be weaker versus another setup. This is indeed something to keep in mind. Still, I give the Night Shard a S tier and the Night Comet a B tier, because Night Comet is much better than the Comet, whereas the Night Shard is only about the same as the Swift Glintstone Shard. Ambush Shard is not a Night Sorcery, but oh, how I wish it was. It's the same color with nearly the same interactions as the other Night Sorceries. It isn't actually difficult to dodge if you know it's coming, nor is it cheap to cast. The main use of this spell is to hit targets behind shields. As for Eternal Darkness, it does next to nothing against non-sorcerers, but it is indeed effective against many sorceries, often giving you a large advantage. However, it isn't a cure-all. It takes 25 FP to cast and lasts around 15 seconds. The caster also has to be close enough within the dark hole range for the gravitation to protect the caster. It doesn't work against all the spells, like Carrion Slicer for example. Furthermore, if there isn't enough distance between the enemy and the caster for the suction, even projectile spells can hit the enemy before they get sucked away. Night Sorceries and Ambush Shard also ignore Eternal Darkness, as I've demonstrated in my Wintry Knight build, so there are plenty of workarounds. There is also nothing that stops your opponent from just swapping to their weapons and using weapon arts, so there are plenty workarounds. Therefore, I'm giving it a B tier. And this is the final tier list for sorceries in PvP. I strongly suggest avoiding all spells in F tier, and only using the D tier spells in very niche builds. Ideally, you won't really be tapping into either of these tiers for most general sorcery builds because of how inefficient they are, which is a big problem with spells in general for PvP. With a quick tally of the number of spells in each tier, we quickly find that C to S tier only comprises of 30 spells, while D and F tier add up to 40. The top of this tier list is very narrow, while the number of poor spells outweigh even usable spells, not to mention good ones. I really do hope there are future DLCs that introduce better spells for PvP, and hopefully see better balanced patches than patch 1.05. If you enjoyed the breakdown, like and subscribe for more. Krite, signing out.